We've worked our way all the way back to the 6th console generation. The generation that started when I was in college, right when I started college. That was a long time ago. And this game was a launch title for the PlayStation 2. I think it was a launch title. It was close to that window. Don't hold me to that. Don't hold me to that. But it's Shadow Hearts. This game took me forever to finish. When I finished the game, I thought to myself, geez, I bet I've been playing this for like 4 months or something. I looked it up. Dude, I started playing it in freaking November of last year. It's September now. That's 10 months. It took me 10 months to beat this game, which is crazy because it's only freaking 30 hours long. And it's not because it's a bad game. It was just hard to find the time to sit down and play an old school JRPG, which is what this game is. Now, this game was not picked for me to play randomly. I spent a gold star to pick this because it had been on my backlog so long, and so many people were telling me how good it was. So I beat a bunch of games to earn a gold star, and I picked this one from my backlog to dive into. Now, this is the sequel to a very expensive and rare PlayStation 1 game called Kudelka, which I also own. And for some reason, I just dove into Shadow Hearts first without playing Kudelka. I will tell you this, I recommend you play Kudelka first because a lot of the things that happen in that game apparently, and I wouldn't know, but it seems like it, they reference it all the freaking time, they carry over to this game, okay? It really is a sequel. Now, the story of this is that you're playing as Yuri, and you have to save Alice, which is the female protagonist in the game. Turns out a bunch of supernatural beings are after her, and you discover that she's the key to some ritual, and you have to stop the ritual from happening. Seems like typical JRPG stuff, right? And it is. Also, there's like some political side plot stuff and, you know, forces want to open the demon gate to friggin' destroy Japan, who's been threatening invasion to China. There's all this stuff. I mean, it's too hard to go over, right? It's a 30-hour JRPG. I could be here all day explaining to you what's going on to this game, but the story is decent enough, and it did hold my attention, which is saying more for it than it does for a lot of other JRPGs that just bore the ever-loving crap out of me. Now, this is just a turn-based RPG, but it has a really interesting timing mechanic with this wheel thing, and it sort of reminds me of Super Mario RPG, where there's kind of a rhythm game system to it. So when you do an attack or cast a spell or use an item or whatever, this wheel pops up and it has markings on it, and you have to press a button when the little needle goes by these markings. If you hit all of them in the right area, then this attack or whatever will go through. If you miss one, you get penalized. Sometimes the spell won't happen, but if you hit it in like that special red area, you get a bonus to it, and I love it. Now, sometimes the freaking sections are really small and hard to hit. Sometimes the little needle spins really quickly, which can add a lot of tenseness to this game. Also, the enemies love to freaking debuff you to make the wheel really small, or even make the sections on it invisible so you can't see where to click, where you just have to remember. And I actually liked this. It kept the gameplay in terms of the combat really engaging and helped keep me awake, whereas if it's just normal turn-based combat, sometimes I'll fall asleep. As for Yuri, him being the main character, he's a little different. Now, he has these monster souls that he takes into his body, and he can equip them to turn into different, they're essentially combat classes. There's like a healer, there's a magic user, you know, there's a melee character, that sort of stuff. And they level up over time, which is kind of neat. Now, as for traversal in the game, there's no overworld. You just kind of go from location to location on this map, and once you get to the environment, you explore around like you would in any other JRPG. And it's fun, but it's, you know, it doesn't give that grand sense that you do in a game like Final Fantasy X, where you're running through like giant open fields and things like that. Also, the games in this, despite the little wheel, are pretty grindy. You never really get to the point where you feel super overpowered, and you're always kind of struggling along. And that's for several different reasons. The game has not only like a health counter and a mana counter, it has this SP gauge. And it acts like a timer almost. Every action you do subtracts from this SP gauge. And when it gets depleted, your character goes into like berserk mode and starts just attacking the other characters in the party and casting random spells and using random items and stuff like that. And you have to keep up with this SP gauge in addition to your health and your mana. And it's just that having that one extra thing's a lot to keep track of with a 3-party combat system when you only typically have like one healer. Because you got to keep the mana up, you got to keep their health up, you got to keep this SP gauge up, and it's like you'll often find yourself with 2 characters in a support role while only one character is dealing out damage, and that gets really tiring. And it can make even just mundane fights late in the game take 5-10 minutes or something like that. Now, as for the aesthetic and the presentation, there's this kind of Edwardian British style mixed with this cosmic horror and Buddhist spirituality and this Chinese romance of the Three Kingdoms crossover. I've never seen anything quite like it. It's very unique, and I did like the settings, and I liked the environments, and I loved the pre-rendered backgrounds, and the character models look really good. For a game that came out in like 2000, this game really stands out. The music's good, but it can get a little irritating. The combat encounters have this like that it just does over and over and over again, and that crap was driving me insane. It was driving me so crazy. I freaking hated it. I live streamed this game one night and everybody was commenting about how annoying the combat music was. It was just unbearable after just a few minutes, and the fact that it's like that for hours of the game really grates on you. And some of the other music feels a little out of place with these like fast breakbeats over like droning. Think of like Tibetan chants, which is like going on, and at the same time it's like you're just like, oh my god, stop. What is happening? Am I trying to meditate, or am I trying to like go to a rave? There's this dichotomy between the music, and it was just so bonkers. As for what it's like to really play the game, it's just a standard JRPG with the items that do what you think they do, you know? It's a little all over the place for the first 20 hours or so. And I didn't really get a lot of the significance of what was going on, probably because I haven't played freaking Kudelka. But after 20 hours, the last third of the game, it really opened up and grabbed me. That's when I started really caring about the characters and caring about the story, and really started unlocking skills and spells and stuff that you could use in combat that made things more strategic and fun. So it did redeem itself. It was getting to the point where I kind of hated it, and that's why it took me so freaking long, because I couldn't make myself play for more than 30 minutes where I was like, oh god, I want to go to bed, like I'm so sleepy. But the last 10 hours or so I blew through in like a week. It was no issue at all. I wish the whole game had kept up that sort of quality. Now, the game's not perfect, and it is 24 years old. That's a quarter of a century, and there's some things that I don't like about it. The main character, Yuri's a little sexist, and he makes a lot of like sex jokes directed at the women that makes him seem like, you know, he might assault them at any moment, right? Where like, he's like, you're cute, and she's like, I feel like I'm gonna faint. He's like, oh man, you won't know what's gonna happen when you're unconscious. That kind of stuff that's really inappropriate now. It was inappropriate then, but like, we were more likely to let it slide 25 years ago, right? There's also just too much dialogue. Most RPGs have too much dialogue. This is no different. And there's some dated humor that some people might find offensive, and that's okay. Find it offensive. I was offended by a fair amount of it, and I'm not easily offended. They would have to patch a lot of this out if this game came out today, okay? Now, I'm not gonna go in depth what it is. Just be prepared that some of the humor is juvenile and insensitive. There are also a lot of like classic tropes where they introduce a new character and then kill them 5 freaking minutes later. And you're supposed to have like this big emotional response. Like, oh no, like how could they do that to soldier number 7? And they'll also do things like bosses. There'll be bosses where you'll have a 15-minute fight leading up to a boss, and the boss comes out and it just casts instant death on the whole freaking party after like a 10-minute unskippable cutscene. It's like, oh, you were supposed to equip the trinket that doesn't allow them to cast instant death on you. And it's like, how the freaking crap would I know that? Like, unless it's already happened. I didn't know what was going to happen to the boss, man. I just got here. The last boss is freaking epic, but he's also really frustrating, and it's a long slog. And I used more consumables on this last boss than I have ever used in any RPG. Normally I hoard my consumables, and I'm so glad that I did, because I used like over 100 of them fighting this boss. I did have a good time with it. However, I will say this, there are 2 endings, a good ending and a bad ending. The bad ending is canon. That's the one that the sequel to this game uses. So that's the one you want to go for, believe it or not. For a dated and old JRPG, Shadow Hearts really holds up. And I'm excited to see what the sequels hold. I can't wait to play them. I have all of them and Koudelka, the first game, which I'm also gonna play. If you have the patience for old JRPGs, from like the PlayStation 2 era, you should give this one a shot. It's a classic for a reason. I think you'll really like it. I think you'll like the atmosphere. Shadow Hearts on the PlayStation 2 is an 8 out of 10. It really is great, and I enjoyed my time with it.